I am Calvin Rhodes, 72 years old, and I have lived most of my life by the water. Harbor Point in Maine is a quiet place, the sort of town where the tide keeps time better than any clock. I worked in a shipyard for more years than I can count, sanding holes, tightening bolts, and going home with salt in my clothes. I was proud of that work because it was steady and honest. My wife Lillian used to say the ocean was the only thing I ever truly listened to. When she passed, the house felt too large and too silent. I held on for a while, but the quiet grew heavier each year. That was when my son Evan told me I should move in with him and his wife Megan. He said it would be easier, said I should not be alone at my age. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe we could be a family again. Their house was warm the day I moved in, but it was a warmth I had to step quietly into. Megan had already arranged the guest room. She had also packed away my old photos before I arrived because she thought they might feel heavy. I told myself she meant well. The first week felt like settling sand. I woke up early like I always had. The kitchen was my routine, coffee brewing before the sun rose. Megan told me to stop doing that. She said she liked the kitchen clean in the morning, so I waited until she woke up to ask if it was all right to have coffee. It felt like a small thing, and small things are easy to ignore. My old recliner from my house was brought over wrapped in a moving blanket. I pictured it beside the window where I could watch the street. Instead, when the movers arrived, Megan told them to put it in the basement. She said the color did not match the living room. She said I would be more comfortable downstairs. I nodded because that was easier, but it felt like watching a piece of my voice sink out of sight. There were other things. Conversations about the grocery list where I would say, I remembered buying bread the day before, and Megan would tilt her head and say, I must be mistaken because there was no bread in the house. Once I looked in the pantry later and found the bread behind a row of jars. I stood there with the door open, my hand resting on the shelf, trying to remember if I had put it there. Doubt slips into the mind quietly like fog over water. Not sudden. Just there. Evan was not unkind, but he was often distracted. He worked from home, or at least that was what he said he was doing. I would hear him pacing in his office and sighing into the phone. When we spoke, it was brief. How are you feeling? Did you take your pills? Try to rest. The conversations were caring on the surface, but shallow underneath, like a boat floating with no anchor. Megan always sounded gentle. That was the part that made it confusing. She would place a hand on my arm and say she noticed I had been forgetting things more often. She told me aging could be frightening, but that they were there to help. When someone tells you they are helping you, want to believe it. You want to trust that love is guiding the conversation. But I started writing lists. Small ones, grocery items, phone numbers, the date, just to make sure I was still here thinking clearly. The house did not change all at once. It simply felt smaller, room by room. There were places I no longer stepped into because they felt like they belonged to someone else. I found myself walking slower in the hallway, as though I needed permission to exist inside the walls. One evening just before the sun dipped behind the harbor, I sat outside on their porch. The boards were cool under my palms. The air smelled like pine and faint salt. Across the road, the water moved in steady ripples. I watched the same horizon I had watched my whole life, and wondered when a home stops being a home. Maybe this is what aging is, I thought. Not the body growing weaker, but the world growing smaller around you. I walked to the notary office on a cool morning when the fog still hung low over Harbor Point. The building was small, with white paint chipping near the door. I had been told to come because there were final matters to settle regarding my brother Samuel. He was older than me by 5 years, steady as a lighthouse beam. He had lived alone most of his life and never spoke much about his finances. I expected paperwork signatures, maybe a box of his old belongings. The notary, a man named Mark Ellison, with calm eyes and slow movements, sat with me at a polished wooden desk. He explained that Samuel had arranged his affairs carefully. Then he told me my brother left me 3 rental apartments in Portland and a cabin by Lake Sebago. I sat very still for a moment and let the words settle. It felt like someone had placed a warm hand in mine after years of cold. Mark went on to say the apartments were occupied by long-term renters and generated monthly income. The cabin, he said, was furnished and maintained. Samuel had been paying for everything. He said my brother left a short letter as well. The letter was handwritten, and the ink had faded in places, as if Samuel paused often while writing. It said that he wanted me to have a place that was mine. It said I had given so much of my life to others that it was time I had something set aside for myself. At the end, it said that I should not speak of this gift until I was certain who stood with me and who stood on me. I held the letter between my fingers and felt something loosen in my chest. I could breathe in a way I had not in a long time. I thanked Mark and shook his hand before leaving. On the walk home, the wind off the harbor carried the scent of salt and fish. I took the long route along the shoreline. My steps felt lighter than they had in months. I imagined Evan smiling when I told him the news. I pictured Megan relieved. Maybe softer, maybe less tense. The money could help ease whatever burden rested on Evan. We had not spoken about it, but I knew something weighed on him. This could change things. I thought of the cabin, a place to sit by the water, a place to invite them on weekends. Maybe we could find our way back to the easy laughter we once had. Hope rose in me like the tide against the rocks. I wanted to bring something home that made us feel like a family again. When I reached the house, the afternoon light slanted through the windows. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside quietly so as not to break the soft feeling I was carrying. I heard voices from the living room. The door there was not fully closed. I paused not to listen, but because something in their tone made me still. Megan was speaking. She said she had spoken with the doctor and that the evaluation would be simple. Evan replied in a low voice, asking if there would be trouble. Megan said there would not be trouble if they moved quickly. She said that once I was declared unable to manage my own affairs, they could apply for guardianship. She said the state often sided with family in cases like mine. She spoke about selling the house. She spoke about moving me into a care facility. She said it would all be for my safety. She said they were doing what was best. I did not step forward. I did not make a sound. I stood with my hand resting on the door frame and the letter from Samuel still in my coat pocket. Evan asked her if this was the right thing to do. His voice cracked a little, like he was trying to swallow something sharp. Megan answered him with a soft tone, the same tone she used when she told me not to brew coffee too early. She told him I was declining. She said I did not know how much I was forgetting. She said I was slipping. He asked how soon they could file the paperwork. She said soon. She said they could start with the bank account. She said everything would fall into place. In that moment, it felt as if the walls of the house pressed closer around me. I remembered the bread hidden behind the jars, the recliner moved to the basement, the careful reminders that I should rest, the quiet suggestion that I was losing myself. I felt the weight of it all settle in my bones. I had thought I would walk into this home, holding something that could bring us together. Instead, it felt like I had returned to something already decided without me. I stepped back from the doorway and smoothed my coat. I walked into the kitchen as if I had heard nothing. The kettle was on the counter. I picked it up and filled it with water from the tap. I could feel my hands moving slowly but steadily. Evan and Megan stopped speaking when they heard me. They came into the kitchen, both smiling. Megan asked if I wanted tea. Evan asked how my appointment had gone. I said it was fine. Just routine. Nothing important. My voice sounded calm. I set 2 cups on the counter. My chest felt hollow, but my face did not show it. We stood in that kitchen like 3 people who cared for each other. The late light fell through the window and touched the floor in long shapes. I kept my eyes on the steam rising from the kettle. Inside, something closed quietly the way a door closes in a room far away. I did not confront them. I did not ask why. I simply held the moment still, as if by not moving, I could delay what would come next. My heart did not break loudly. It folded inward quietly, like paper being creased along a line that had always been there. I waited until the house was silent. It was late past the time when even the harbor winds seemed to rest. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long while, steadying my breathing. The decision had already been made, but my hands needed time to understand what my heart already knew. I reached for the small canvas bag in the closet and placed inside only what mattered. A change of clothes, the letter from Samuel, my wallet. A photograph of Lillian and me taken on a summer afternoon when the sun was high and the world felt simple. I did not take anything else. I did not want my departure to feel like a theft. I wanted it to feel like a return. The floor creaked lightly under my feet as I walked down the hallway. I knew which boards made noise and I stepped around them. The house was dim except for a street lamp casting pale light through the living room window. I could hear Evan breathing from behind his door. Slow, heavy, a tired breath that did not match youth. Megan slept lighter. Her breathing was softer, quicker, as if she was always ready to wake. I moved carefully, but I was not afraid. I felt strangely calm. I passed the kitchen, the kettle still sitting where I had left it earlier. The silence settled around me, familiar, but no longer frightening. The night air outside was cold enough to sting. The sky was clear, and the moon cast silver across the road. I pulled my coat tight and walked slowly, feeling the gravel crunch under my shoes. Harbor Point was quiet at this hour. The houses stood still, the windows dark. The sea was close enough that I could hear it moving, a slow, constant sound. I walked toward Joanne's house. She was a widow, too. She understood silence better than most. Her porch light was always left on, a habit she kept long after her husband passed. I stepped onto her porch and knocked gently so I would not disturb the stillness of the night. She opened the door with a look that told me she already knew something had shifted. I sat at her kitchen table while she made tea. I told her I needed help. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I spoke plainly, as though I were telling her that the weather was changing. She listened without interrupting. She reached for the phone and called Mark Ellison. He answered even at this late hour. Joanne spoke with quiet urgency, and then she handed the phone to me. Mark said he would take care of everything. He told me to stay where I was. He said no one could force me back into that house. His voice was steady and clear, a voice I could lean on. By the next afternoon, arrangements had been made. Mark met me in town and drove me to the cabin. The road wound through the woods, the trees tall and bare. When we reached the lake, the water looked still like glass. The cabin stood close to the shore. It was simple and sturdy. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar. Mark gave me new keys and placed a folder of documents on the table. Everything was in my name. Everything was secure. He told me to rest. Then he left quietly, as if the moment needed to keep its own shape. I did not sleep right away. I stepped outside and walked down to the lake. The sky was beginning to pale with the first hint of dawn. The surface of the water reflected the changing light. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets and breathed deeply. The air was cold, but it filled me. I realized that I had not taken a full breath in years. I watched the morning come slowly, the way healing sometimes does. I had not left my life behind. I had stepped back into it. The hearing was held in a small courthouse with tall windows that let in too much morning light. I sat at the table beside Mark, my hands folded together. I felt steady. I had already lived the hardest part of this story, and now I was simply here to speak the truth. Evan and Megan were across the room. Megan held herself upright with a confidence that looked rehearsed. Evan kept his eyes on the floor. He looked older than I remembered, as if worry had carved lines into him overnight. The judge entered, and the room grew quiet. Papers were passed. Words were spoken that sounded clinical and distant. Incapacity, guardianship, best interests. It was strange to hear my life described in terms that did not belong to me. Megan spoke first. Her voice was smooth and controlled. She said they had been caring for me for months. She said they had noticed my memory slipping. She said they were only trying to make sure I was safe. There was a polished certainty to the way she spoke. Listening, I could almost believe her myself if I had not been inside the moments she was reshaping. Evan nodded beside her, but his shoulders were pulled inward. When it was his turn to speak, his voice caught. He said he had thought it was the right thing to do. He said that aging could be complicated. Then he fell silent, and Megan placed a hand on his arm, as if guiding him back into position. Mark presented the records showing the steps I had taken on my own. The bank documents, the independent medical evaluation confirming I was of sound mind, the log of notes I had kept to track conversations and events. He spoke calmly, never raising his tone. He did not need to. The facts did the work. When it was time for me to speak, I stood slowly. My voice felt clear. I said that I had worked my entire life and had lived through loss without disappearing. I said that growing older did not mean I had stopped being myself. I said I did not wish to be cared for by force. I said I wished to remain present in my own life while I was still living it. There were no dramatic flourishes. The words did not need them. The judge took her time before responding. She looked at each of us in turn. Then she said the guardianship petition was denied. She said that I was capable of making my own decisions. She said I was free to live where I chose. There was no applause, no sighs of relief, just a quiet stillness that settled over the room like dust settling on a windowsill. I did not look at Megan as I left, but I did look at Evan. For a moment, he met my eyes. And in that moment, I saw the truth I had missed. His debt had begun when Megan fell ill years ago. The treatments were expensive. He had taken loans he could not repay. He had carried that fear alone, and it had changed him. He had not meant to lose himself. He had simply been too tired to hold on. I felt something release inside me. Not acceptance, not closeness, just understanding. I did not return to their house. I went back to the cabin. The lake was calm when I arrived. In the weeks that followed, I joined a small community group in town. We met once a week to share stories, drink coffee, and remind one another that life does not end just because it becomes quieter. I planted a small vegetable garden beside the cabin. I read in the afternoons. I walked by the water at dusk. Sometimes I think about Evan. I hope he finds his way back to himself. I hope the weight he carries becomes lighter. I do not need to be part of that journey for it to matter. Forgiveness